Welcome to Be the Good with Kate, the show where guests leave you inspired to uncover your passions and discover tangible ways to make a difference along the way. I'm your host, Kate Chericello-Tente, and here I talk to individuals who are doing just that. Individuals from all walks of life and industries following their passions and making the world a better place while they do. With guests hailing from Bali to Utah, Florida to Japan, and just about everywhere in between, something I love about human connection and inspiration is how you certainly don't need to be from the same place or a similar background to get so much out of hearing from a person. In fact, I think it is better that way. We notice how we as humans are so similar in so many ways, and how each of us has so much power to make a difference in our own lives and the lives of others. I hope you're inspired here to start, restart, or continue your journey of finding your passions and helping others along the way. I love a text saying, "This made me think of you today." If there is someone in your life who could use today's story, click share and send their way. And thank you for helping to inspire more people. Now onto this week's episode. Let's spread a little more goodness in the world. Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate. Today I have Elizabeth Bieniek with me, and I'm so delighted she's here. Here's a little bit from her bio. She is named one of the most influential female pioneers in technology. Elizabeth's an author, founder, and Fortune 100 leadership veteran focused on good peopling, very on theme with the podcast, as the secret to exceptional execution. After turning corporate innovation on its head with her own unconventional success story, Elizabeth now helps leaders tap into the individual genius within their teams to unlock unrivaled innovation and uncover joy in the journey. I love those last words, joy in the journey. Elizabeth, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's great to be here.
Oh, thank you. And now I love what you're doing, but I think if the listener hears your bio, they think, wait a minute, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? What kind of, walk us through that? What is your world like on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, I have a very chaotic, unpredictable world on a day-to-day basis. I think that's part of being a mom and a founder and everything rolled into one.
Sure.
But to give a little background on that, I spent several years, almost a couple decades in high tech. And most of that time was spent helping build a internal startup inside of big tech. And so it was very much like running a stealth startup, but having some of the backing and resources of a large corporation, sometimes some of the red tape too. But that was a very interesting journey. Intrapreneurship is usually the terminology that's used. It's very similar to entrepreneurship, just done in an internal environment. And going through that process, there were just a lot of lessons learned in really how do you motivate people towards a common goal in this unique environment? How do you really have that scrappy startup feel and be able to work with people to say, hey, I know you're hired for this thing, but you're great at this. How do we really wear multiple hats all together and together make something that's better, as the whole is more than the sum of the parts, if you will, of how do you put this all together in a way that's unique and different. And right now I've moved on from a corporate environment to now my own company that's focused on helping other leaders move their organization forward in an unprecedented and unique way.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you find with that? Because I know just listening, I'm hearing like, oh, people talk about burnout when they're creating things. People talk about overwhelm. What are some of the challenges you find in helping leaders?
I think a lot of times it's very simple, just reminder that people are people. And just taking a pause and a step back. I think especially when you get involved in things that could be cutting edge technology or really fast paced industries, sometimes we get so caught up in the thing that we're doing that we forget the people that we're doing it with and why we're doing it. So sometimes it's simply a pause and a step back. I would love for someone to think an encounter with me in their business is like a breath of fresh air. It's just a pause. Let's have that calming breeze. Take a step back. Think, why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? And just think about this. Let's just pause and think. A lot of times we get so busy in our day-to-day, like we have this milestone, I have this deliverable, I have to make these numbers, that we sometimes think that's a luxury to take that pause, but it's really not. If you want to be innovative, if you want to be successful, if you want to really do something groundbreaking, you have to be on point. You don't have time to waste time on rabbit trails that are maybe not aligned with your core mission. So it's not a luxury. It's actually a necessity to pause and think why we're doing this.
You reminded me of an episode. This is maybe 2 years ago now on the podcast. It was an acupuncturist. And I asked her, what advice do you have for someone who wants to follow their passion and make a difference along the way? And she just said, breathe. And I thought that was great. I'm like, oh, and no matter what industry you're in, here's Elizabeth in her industry saying the same concept, right? That pause, that breathing, that taking the moment to remind yourself of why you're in it and what you're doing it for. So thank you for pointing that out.
Now I have to go back and dig up that episode.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. And that's something I love about this show too, is that people from all different backgrounds and industries, we all have these same base themes and issues. And it's a great way to remind us that we're all so connected, even when on the surface, like your industry sounds so different from, a person X, Y, and Z's industries. And yet you have some really strong foundational similarities, which I think is just so cool about this. Now, tell me, when you were 10, 11, 12, is this what you had in mind for your career? How did it come
Not
about?
even close. Not even close. I wanted to study volcanoes.
Oh, volcanoes. Okay.
I was talking to my kids about this recently. I was on this big volcano kick for a while, and I thought volcanoes were amazing. And I'm like, I want to be that person that's like the helicopter flying over as it's erupting and you're like exploring and studying it. And I was in this big geology kick for a while, and then I moved on to marine biology, and then didn't end up anywhere remotely close to those fields. I have a undergrad in English, which is also not what I started college for. I was halfway through my junior year when I had a professor convince me to switch my major.
Oh my gosh.
So cheers to the late bloomers that maybe find out a little bit later what they're going to do. And then I thought I was going to go into creative writing. I was all set to pursue my master's in fine arts in creative writing, and then hard pivoted and went into business school instead.
Gosh.
And I like to say I fell into technology. It was never my intent to work for a large technology corporation, a Fortune 100 technology company. I married a biomedical engineer by training, and I always joke that I married the engineer. I'm not going to be the engineer. And I did really found myself just falling into an opportunity at a large corporation. And then once inside, started asking questions like, why do we do this way? And could we do it this way? Could we do it differently? And I think being an outsider was actually, in hindsight, very helpful, because I wasn't encumbered by bias or notions or education of this is how we do it and this is the way, and I've memorized this process. I was just coming to it as like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Why don't we do it that way? I used to be in this space, and we did this different thing over here. Like, why not do that here? Yeah, okay, nobody's done it in tech before, but why not? It's just seems like common sense. And a lot of those sort of internal experiences just led to different roles. I think after I'd been at the company for a few years, I ended up moving to different roles, but there was never a job. There was never a description. It was always had a conversation with this executive and like, hey, I saw what you did here. Do you think you could do this over here? Or I'd come with an idea of like, hey, I want to do this. Is anybody doing that? Is there an appetite or market for it? And then we might create a role for it. So it was a very roundabout way of getting where I ended up. And no, not what my 10-year-old self thought I was going to be doing.
But I'm hearing these words. What I'm thinking of when you're saying this is creativity and curiosity. And now that you're working with leaders too, are you finding that those are the people that are making the most successful and happiest leaders? Those that aren't scared of asking questions and being so creative and maybe even coming from a totally different background?
The ones that might not be as flashy, but much less likely to burn out because they're happy. They've carved out a niche that makes sense. And I think a lot of times we've been sold this bill of like, this is what success looks like, and it's this one model. And that's not really working. For most people, that typical model of success, that's this, fame and money and on the cover of this, and like, that's not really what most of us want. Most of us want to be happy, valued, do something that we enjoy, be able to embrace curiosity every day, work with people that are fun. Like, those are the things that give joy and make us happy. And when you find something in that environment that aligns with what you want to do and how you want to spend your time, you're naturally going to spend more mental energy making that effective. And that's usually what allows people to be successful. So I work with a lot of people that are just really interesting, fun people who have carved out these unique niches that same thing. They never thought they were going to be doing this at 10 because it's something nobody ever heard of or it didn't exist. And then it just an opportunity arose and a question arose and they decided to pursue it and pull on that and it opened up an opportunity. And I think those are some of the most unique and fun and engaging people to work with because they're doing something different.
And how do you find the leaders or they find you to work with you?
Everything's about people. It's just relationships. Everything comes down to connection. I mean, every once in a blue moon, I have somebody just cold reach out and I'll connect with them. But in most cases, it's just, hey, I got recommended because I talked to these two, you guys should talk. Or, hey, I think you might find a connection here. And so much of that is just network and relationships because that's what makes the world go round.
Oh, absolutely. And now something I read about you, let's see, I wrote it down here. I love that you commented about the power in admitting you don't know everything. Talk to me more about that.
I'm pretty open with that one. And I think like my background, I was saying, I was always the outsider. I was always the one in the room that I didn't have the PhD in engineering like everybody else sitting at the table. I had a business degree and I used to work in English and at a design studio. I did very different things. So this was really easy for me because I had to come in and admit that I didn't know everything. But I think in the process of doing that, I realized how hard that is for other people who are almost like chained down by their pedigree. They have the right education, they went to the right school, they had the right companies on their resume, and then they feel like they have to live up to this certain standard. And if I ask the dumb question, that's just this illusion that people have of me is going to shatter. And so I have to have this perfect image. And that's a really hard environment to live in. That's a really stressful environment to live in. And when you're not shackled by that and it's pretty obvious that you aren't going to know all these things because you're coming from a very different space. People don't expect you to know everything. So you can ask the outlandish question like, well, why not this? And there might be a very valid reason, but there's been plenty of times I've been the one dissenting voice that's saying, why don't we do this? And nobody could give a good answer. And like, we just never thought about that because we've always done this. Like, okay, so it wasn't a dumb question. Let's think about, could we do it this way? And let's talk about that. So I think there's a lot of freedom when you admit that you don't know everything. And I've also spoken and written about this topic of, as a leader, I think it is your responsibility to be vulnerable with your people and admit that you don't know everything. Because when you take that pressure off of yourself, it takes the pressure off everybody else in the room. And your team is now no longer thinking every time I open my mouth, I have to prove myself and I have to validate why I'm smart and why I'm here. And like you remove that and like, wow, if the boss just said they don't know everything and they just threw something out that could be outlandish, then that's okay. That's accepted in this environment. I don't have to front. I don't have to portray this image. I can ask a question that might seem dumb or stupid or outlandish. And once you do that, that's when you get to really good brainstorming. That's when you get to really good collaboration because people are free to bring those crazy ideas. And your idea might be crazy and it might not work, but it might spark something in somebody else who's like, oh, what about this? And then somebody else jumps in, oh, what about this? And that's when you get to these really awesome ideas.
I mean, that's the only way we have innovation, right? Is those crazy ideas. If we all just did it because that's how it was done, where would we be?
Yeah, 100%.
You know, it's so funny, timely you said this yesterday. No kidding. I was listening to Mel Robbins' podcast interview with, I'm blanking on who it was, but they were talking about public speaking came up. And she was saying like the best way to connect with an audience is when something goes wrong, you just say, oh, this isn't working right now, but you can just carry on. And people are so drawn to the vulnerability and the relatability. And that goes with anything. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And another thing you mentioned was that when the person feels that that's accepted to show up and be wrong. And that's so important in business too. And I'm sure that must come up with you with working with leaders of how to interact with those employees who do want to bring something up that maybe is different or never before seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it really comes back to those basic human tenets of we all have our relationships based on trust. Do I trust this individual or this group that I'm interacting with? And that level of trust determines how much I'm willing to bring to the table. So if there's no trust, I'm not going to give very much. But if there's a lot of trust, then I'm going to give a lot. And it's not rocket science. It's not a new idea. It's not shiny, but it's been around for a long time. But that's probably the biggest indicator of how much of a rich interaction are you going to have is how much trust is in this experience. And it's really hard to build trust if one of the parties is not being authentic and trying to, this is my this is my mask, this is my face, this is my facade, this is all you get to see is this. And if you're in a position of leadership, you have to break first.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. You can't expect your team to go out on that limb when they don't know what they're going to experience. And probably everything in their history has shown them if you are vulnerable and don't have the right answer, you're going to get fired or not get the project or whatever the case is, not get the funding. So you have to give first in that equation and be vulnerable, be open, be authentic with who you are. And when you model that behavior, your team is more likely to respond to it. Because I use this example a lot of how often, because everybody has experienced this. You've had a manager at some point in your career that said, I have an open door policy, or a professor in school or anything. I have open door policy, come to me anytime. And then if they have a physical office, their door is literally never open because they're in meetings all the time. Or if it's a virtual connection, you go to book a meeting and it's like 3 months out because you can't get time. Or you book something and then it gets canceled the day before or the day of. You are saying one thing, but you are acting a way that's contrary to that, and people will always respond to what you do, not what you say. So your behavior needs to model what you're saying. So that's why I say when you have these interactions and you say, like, I want raw feedback, I want crazy ideas, I want outlandish stuff, you have to model that first. You can't say that, step back, never put yourself out there, and just be like, all right, everybody, go out on a limb for me. They're not going to do it. But if you go out on a limb first and show, hey, it's okay out here, I'm bobbing around in the breeze, but we're going to be okay. Then once you've modeled it, people can see, all right, that is okay. That is safe. That is acceptable. And you build that trust. And then you get to these really great conversations.
Oh my God. So much jam-packed into what you're saying. And let's go on a tangent just for a real quick second, because something you said really made me think about this, because we were just talking about you have 3 children, I have 1 little one, and how do you model that for your children, that idea of not being afraid to make the mistake, to speak up even when the idea sounds crazy? Because what they learn now absolutely then affects them as an adult to not be afraid to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned this lesson the hard way, actually, early on. When my oldest, who's only 10 now, when she was young and would ask questions, she's very sensitive about how people respond to it. Like if she would ask something and it was kind of a crazy idea or a crazy question and you laughed because it's generally funny, she would just shut down. So I realized early on, like I have to not laugh, even if it's really cute and adorable and funny, and I want to laugh because I'm laughing with you. I'm not laughing at you. She just didn't receive that well. So my middle one started having similar response to things too, and would get very touchy if his big sister didn't respond to things, a certain way. So with them, I would try to be very conscious of whatever crazy question you ask, whatever thing you throw out, realize a lot of times they're asking a question that it's very legit. They just don't have the background and experience to understand how something fits in a part of the world. And that's my responsibility as a parent to give them those experiences and communicate those things to them. So if they're asking a question, that's a valid question. So I started really focusing on that with my kids and making sure that any question that they ask is a serious question. And we're going to explore it seriously without laughter, without poking fun, without saying, well, why didn't you know that? And that, I think, by the time my third one came around, I was getting better at it. So there was more instilled. And I actually just wrote a post on my LinkedIn profile a week or two ago about this. We're driving to the store and I only had my youngest, she's 5, in the car with me. And just out of the blue, she just asked me, she's like, Mom, do ants like to get washed? And I just paused for a minute, and then she kind of clarified. She's like, with soap and stuff. And I was thinking about it. Like, it was the type of thing of years ago I would have just chuckled because it's such a funny, outlandish, crazy question. Right. But I ended up blogging on this and tying it in a little bit to AI and like the brave new technology world that we're going into, of we have to be willing to ask those outlandish questions, because I stopped and thought about it and I'm like, I've been on this planet for a long time. I've got decades of career experience. I've honestly never thought about what an ant would experience being washed if I tried to wash an ant. I assume that they wouldn't like it, but I don't know. I've never done it. And so I wrote about this a little bit, and I had a good conversation with her. We just kind of talked about it, but it was a great reminder of, I love the fact that she did not have fear of asking this question, because we just sat down and talked about it. Like, do ants like to be washed? Well, let's think about that. And then I ended my post on LinkedIn of like, if anybody's actually tried washing an ant, let me know, because I have a very curious 5-year-old that wants to talk about it. But I think creating that space where people feel safe and comfortable to ask the crazy questions. And most of the times when you stop and think about it, like, a crazy question is really not that crazy. A lot of times it's just looking at something from a fresh perspective. And in business, that's what you want. You want somebody who's looking at something from a fresh perspective. Otherwise, you're never going to have a breakthrough.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. That was so great. And so I just love it. And just, again, wonderful reminders, whether we are in a workplace or at home with children or just meeting a child. That's fantastic. And Elizabeth, you can so tell you have a creative writing background. Just like how you word things is so fun and creative, but also your title of your book you wrote, Cake on Tuesday. Tell us about that, and then we'll wrap up, but I need to hear about this.
Sure. So the full title is Cake on Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. My publisher did talk me into having a subtitle that explained what it was. But I think because everything in my career path was non-traditional, unique in some ways, I didn't want to write a book that just sounded like every other business book. And the story behind Cake on Tuesday is it details the last 8 years or so of my corporate career, which was primarily leading this one particular startup inside of most of it at the time in stealth mode. And it's not focused on the technology. It's focused on the people and the leadership journey of the things that I learned through the process. And sometimes I would try crazy ideas in the team, and some things worked and some things didn't. And so it's written as 25 little takeaways, and it's a very short, snappy read. And I tried to distill 8 years of trial and error into one quick thing that somebody could read on a coast-to-coast flight. But Cake on Tuesday, the title itself comes from one of the chapters, it was called Have Cake on Tuesday. And that came from a particular spell in the project when it was kind of in the middle. We were past that really exciting startup phase of, ooh, this is momentum and everybody's jazzed and we've got the funding and this is awesome. And we weren't quite at the, all right, we're bringing this to market. We've got customers on board. We're here. We're kind of in that middle. And we didn't have this great milestone to rally around. It was just, okay, we're improving the experience, and now we're improving the experience some more. And it had the potential to lose that excitement. So I was having a conversation with my ops manager at the time, and we're talking about, how do we make this exciting? It's not exciting right now. How do we make it exciting? And she was throwing out a bunch of great ideas, and we kind of were just collaborating, going back and forth. And then she had this idea. She's a maker, crafter, sewer, does all the things. And she was saying, what if I make this Wheel of Fortune style, like Wheel of Winning? We'll just put everybody's name. It was not a huge team. It was like a 2 pizza box team. She's like, we'll put everybody's name on the wheel. And at the end of staff meeting, we'll spin it. And if it lands on your name, Kate, you get a cake. And we're going to send you a cake this week. And there was no reason. There's no purpose. There's no like, you did this thing, so therefore you got it. It was completely random and up to chance. But our staff meetings were on Tuesdays, and that's where Cake on Tuesday came from. It just was a way to make things fun and add excitement when there wasn't necessarily something to rally around.
Oh, that's great. How fun is that? And Elizabeth, just keep up the awesome work. And I can't wait to follow what else you're writing on LinkedIn too, and your book. So please tell everybody where they can find you online and reach out and find your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a website, elizabethbieniek.com, and I have newsletter on there. If you sign up to that, you do get little snippets that don't go anywhere else. But most of my posts are on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile. You can find me, Elizabeth Bieniek, on LinkedIn. I recently started both a Instagram and X account, which is at Cake on Tuesday. And you can buy Cake on Tuesday anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's the audio version now too.
Oh, excellent. Elizabeth, thank you for your time, and thank you for this just great, energetic chat here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this helpful, a 5-star review, like, or comment means the world to me. And if you found insight in this episode, chances are someone else will too. Share with a friend to give them a boost today. Until next time, I'm Kate Cherichello-Tente, and this was Be the Good with Kate.